members business meeting happening next week on the 13th, and that is going to be here in the fellowship hall, going to be right after service. Fun with that. The 27th is going to be the first day where we're over at 525 Arapahoe. So the opportunity for us to move into that space is going to be happening from the 21st basically through the August 3rd. We're going to be moving everything over, but the 27th will be the first time that we have service over at Arapahoe. And we're excited about that. We will be back. James and Josh and I will be back the night before that, so it'll be really fun. But we're going to have a missionary named Jeff Butler who's working with different people overseas. He's going to be coming. He's going to be doing a little presentation for us, and we're going to spend that day working and getting ready for just the next couple of weeks. So the idea is we're going to hang out with him a little bit. We're going to do a devotional. Then we're going to have separate things where we're going to go engage and work in the building, getting the space and place ready. We're going to be doing that on the 27th. We're going to be doing that on the August 3rd, same kind of thing. And then our first official service in that space will be August 10th, okay? And so at that time, we're going to be doing an ordination service for me, which is really sweet. We're going to be doing kids promotion. We're going to be celebrating, all of that kind of different stuff. So it is a crazy busy next couple weeks of getting everything ready, of moving forward. We are going to have a meeting immediately after service-ish, like after everybody grabs a 4th of July balloon and cake and ice cream and stuff like that. We're going to have a quick meeting that I promise you will be an hour or less of what we're going to expect as we move into that building. We're going to put some stuff on a whiteboard, and we're going to say this is what we can expect. I know there's a lot of what's the building's going to look like, what are we going to do over there, what's the space going to look like. This is the meeting where we have all the different ideas we're going to hash those things out, and we're going to make a plan. So the space and place is already planned out, but we're going to talk about the more detailed elements right after this. So make sure you're hanging out. We'll do it right in here, and we'll just kind of do 12:15 because we don't want to be here for 3 hours. It will be a 1 hour or less meeting. You can time me on that. I promise. I've been able to deliver that several times, so that's pretty fun. So, an hour, not an hour and 15, an hour or less. Greg, you excited about an hour or less meeting? All right, cool. All right. And again, that meeting, the members meeting next week is going to be very important, voting on the budget. And then we're also going to be presenting finances and a few other different things. And we'll be talking more about the succession plan as I hand more things off to Ryan and transition. So without further ado, I want to bring up Ryan here. And it's pretty neat to be able to say, Ryan, you are your third week in of a 4-week series. Second weekend of a 4-week series. It's a 4-week series, though, right? I got one of the numbers right. So Ryan is preaching on Joshua, which I don't know if you know this, but my name is Joshua, and I'm very jealous that he gets to preach on this thing. So let me just pray. Oh, go ahead. You're going to say something?
I was just going to say, it was funny when we were first talking about this, because he's like, I've always wanted to preach on the book of Joshua. He's like, I love that you're getting to, but
Yeah.
So.
And those, anybody ever do a Bible bowl or Bible baseball or Bible trivia? Right? Back when you were a kid, in Sunday school or whatever, I was the champion every time the book of Joshua came up, because I was like, I need to know this. It's my name.
That's right.
So, yeah. And I didn't realize Jesus and Joshua were the same thing. I maybe should have focused more on Jesus. I don't know. Well, I did later. All right.
Here you are now.
Yeah, here I am now. Let me pray for Ryan, and then Ryan's going to take it away sermon-wise. All right? Lord, thanks so much for Ryan. Thank you for just the fact that you've blessed him, that you've called him. I pray that you'd open up our hearts and minds to the words that you put on his hearts and minds, Lord. I pray that you would continue to guide him and direct him. And as he speaks, as he dives into these things, thank you for your word and the instruction that we get through that, but not just the things we need to know, but the things we need to engage with our presence and then sink deeply into our hearts, Lord. Lord, I pray that happened today. I pray that you'd be with Kid Zone. I pray that you'd be with youth. Just guide everybody and direct them as we teach and pray and be together in fellowship. We love you. Pray all these things in your name, Jesus, by the power of your Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Kid Zone and youth, you're all dismissed. And I'm going to turn this mic off.
Awesome. And I did the thing that I was going to try not to do, and I forget the clicker. Clicker real quick.
Allow me, Ryan.
Oh, well, thank you, Josh.
You do that for me all the time.
Awesome. Hi, well, good morning, everybody. I want to get started with our message for today as we're continuing in the book of Joshua, but I want to give a little bit of a preview of something that I want to revisit later in the message. Because about 12 years ago, on another summer day, very hot, maybe a little bit of a different kind of heat, because I was in Colorado and not Texas at the time, there was this profound sense of relief and reassurance that I got to experience while I was having one of the most exhausting days of my life, probably up to that point. Because at that time, I was getting to go on this hike. I'll tell more of the story in a little while, but I was able to see the goal of where I was going, but the path that I had laid out in front of me was obscured and difficult at times as I was navigating very tricky terrain. And so as I was trying to navigate this path and try to see, here's where I'm going, I can see the location, the goal. Finding the path was difficult, were it not for one thing that kept popping up all along the trail that gave me a sense of, okay, it's going to be okay. I'm going to get there. And as we get into our message for today, like I said, we're continuing in our series in the book of Joshua. We're in our second week of our 4-week series. And we got to go through the first couple of chapters last week. We're going through just the first few chapters as we go through this mini-series. And the thing that I want to address today is that same kind of feeling as we are, as people of God, trusting God's unfolding plan, where we may have an idea of the destination of maybe where we're going, the door of where God's leading us to, but what do we do when we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have a clear picture of the exact path or exactly the events that are going to unfold, how God's going to get us from here to here? How do we live in that tension? What does it look like when we step forward and all we really have clarity on is maybe just the next couple of steps, and from there it's here's what it looks like for us to go from here to there, and we trust God and we trust His provision and we trust His guidance? What does it look like for us in our own lives and for us as a church community as we're in this really unique season of transition, as we're going from one geographical, physical location to another? We know where we're going, but what does it look like, and even with a plan that we have that we're rolling out for a leadership transition, what does it look like when we're not quite sure exactly how that's going to look? What does it look like to trust God in those times? Well, we're going to get into our passage today. We're going to be in chapters 3 and 4. We'll be looking at the story of the crossing of the Jordan River. And like last week, we'll be making just a few stops along the way because a couple chapters is a bit of a long chunk of narrative, but I want to kind of highlight 3 different parts of the narrative for today. And kind of that first part, we'll get to see how God is continuing to reaffirm promises to Joshua and the people, and He's getting them prepared to literally cross the threshold into the land that He's promised to give them. We're going to see how He shows up in a real and powerful way and gets to show Israel, this is what I'm doing for you, and this is how my name is going before you. And we're also going to get to see just how He wants His people to continue to remember that particular moment. What does it look like to remember and to go forward? As they have relationship with Him and as they're going forward, like we talked about, their identity being rooted in Him, we're going to see kind of what that looks like. Those are going to be our 3 kind of stops through this passage. We're going to get started today with our passage. We're going to be reading from the New Living Translation, and I just want to get started with oh no, I'm not sure if this is actually going to work. What does a red blinking light mean? Battery dying? Oh. Ah, gotcha. Here we go. All right, sorry about that, y'all. Let's go ahead and begin reading. Oh, technical difficulties. Joshua chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, reads, "Early the next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites left Acacia Grove and arrived at the banks of the Jordan River, where they camped before crossing. 3 days later, the Israelite officers went through the camp, giving these instructions to the people. When you see the Levitical priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, move out from your positions and follow them. Since you have never traveled this way before, they will guide you. Stay about half a mile behind them, keeping a clear distance between you and the ark. Make sure you don't come any closer." Then Joshua told the people, "Purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord, Yahweh, will do great wonders among you." In the morning, Joshua said to the priests, "Lift up the Ark of the Covenant and lead the people across the river." And so they started out and went ahead of the people. The Lord told Joshua, "Today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you, just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and stop there." So we're picking up right where we left off last week, where we ended with chapter 2. We didn't get to read the full chapter, but essentially as Joshua sends the 2 spies into the land and they go and they stop in Jericho, they're discovered, and Rahab hides them. And she tells them that this is what people are experiencing as Yahweh's name is going before you. And so the spies go back and they give this report that the courage of these people is melting. And we talked a little bit about this idea of courage last week. Because throughout the first chapter, Joshua is being told by Yahweh, "Chazak v'chamatz, chazak v'chamatz, be strong and of good courage." And we talked about how throughout that challenge, that encouragement from Yahweh, be strong and courageous, that's a courage and a strength that comes directly from him. It's a courage that's rooted in Yahweh and not in, this is leader, like, gird yourself up, bulk up, be strong in who you are. This is a take courage in who I am and what I am doing through you as I'm sending you to the land that I've promised. We saw in the first couple of chapters how we see this transition of a focal point on Moses from Exodus to the end of Deuteronomy, where we see the chapter on Moses' life close and immediately begins to open with Joshua. From the end of Deuteronomy to the beginning of Joshua, now we have Joshua enters into this story. And although he's the namesake of the book, and although we see that he's the one who's leading God's people, it's actually God who's the protagonist of the whole book, as he's leading his people, as he's bringing fulfillment of his promise to his people. So by the time we get to the end of chapter 2, we see that Yahweh's name is going out before his people. And it's because of his name and because of his leading the people of Israel that these people in Jericho, the people of Canaan, are trembling with fear because they're losing any sense of courage that they have based on their own self-assurance of the walls that they have around them, the city that they would retreat to, that they would go when an invading force was coming, was just not enough based on everything that they were hearing about who Yahweh was and what he does for his people. And we pick up where we are here in chapter 3, where preparations are being made. There's a lot of mobilization that's happening here at the beginning of chapter 3. And we see that the Ark of the Covenant is this focal point here. It's important to remember the significance of the Ark because not a lot has been kind of talked about in the first couple of chapters, and so it kind of makes its big entrance here in chapter 3. And there's 3 big things that we see happening with the Ark of the Covenant that's important to kind of see as we're going through our passage today. And the first of those 3 things is that the Ark of the Covenant contained the tablets of the law. So last week we talked about how God called this people of Israel. He called them out of the patriarchs, starting with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he says, "I'm going to make a nation out of you." And then they find themselves over hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt for 400 years. Then he sends Moses, this kind of whole long history that's well known and well rehearsed in Jewish tradition. And God promises to make a nation out of these people in this time where survival was not taken for granted, and that having a family, having a clan, having a people, and having a place where you could go and you could dwell was massive. And God promises them land not just so that they could go and build a kingdom in the little corner of the world and that they could amass wealth and power, but he's sending them ultimately to a land that's going to impact the whole world. Got to talk about that last week. And so with the ark containing the tablets of the law, following the law is a sign of Israel's covenant relationship with Yahweh and a reminder of his faithfulness and their obligations. This is a relationship that they're entering into. This is a partnership that Yahweh wants to have with his people as he's establishing them as his kingdom of priests, and as they're to go, and as they're supposed to represent who he is, his mercy, his justice, and his wisdom to the rest of the world. Remember, their identity is rooted in him. They are his people, his kingdom of priests, and he is their God. That's the first thing to know. The second thing to know about the ark, it does work. The second thing to keep in mind with the ark is that there's a military significance that's playing out here too. We'll see this more as we get into the narrative, but it goes out before Israel into battle just as ancient kings would lead their people. Now, this is really important because the people of Israel, we already see that Yahweh is doing something very different, if not upside down, from what the rest of the world does. Because unlike the pagan kings of the world at that time, who are creating their own system of government and laws and society, but they're all kind of functioning with this kind of pagan belief in that their gods will protect them. Here's the law codes that we have here, the gods of like the earth that we worship and that we give our lives and devote ourselves to so that we can get protection in return. This kind of idea of what it means to have power and to go out and to conquer and to amass power and wealth is different. Because instead of Joshua being the one who's going out and leading the people and who's the one who's parting the waters and who is leading them across the Jordan, we see the Ark of the Covenant going out before Yahweh's people. And this is really huge because Yahweh, or the Ark of the Covenant, represents Yahweh's presence among his people. It's about who he is among them, and he is their true leader and guide as they follow him into the land that he's promised them. And so Joshua tells the people to consecrate themselves. He says, prepare yourselves as we're about to go into this land, as he's about to mobilize them, this ritual cleansing that's about to happen only over the course of a day. He says that purify yourselves, for tomorrow Yahweh will do great wonders among you. And this word for wonders is really cool because we see this same word back in Exodus chapter 3 when God tells Moses, these are the wonders that I will perform before Pharaoh in Egypt for my people. When he talks about performing wonders, we look at the plagues, the 10 plagues, as Moses is going to bring God's people out from slavery in Egypt. And of course, Pharaoh says no multiple times. And so Yahweh is demonstrating who he is, not just to his own people, but also to the powers of Egypt. Not so that he can just torment the people of Egypt and Pharaoh and just keep pounding them, but everything that he does, all of these 10 plagues, are an answer to the deities and the powers that Pharaoh believed that not only would protect his people, but also the power, the sovereign power that he believed he himself possessed. God is showing himself to be sovereign and supreme against all other powers. This is the purpose of the wonders that he demonstrates to his own people and to the rest of the world. Here they demonstrate the power of Israel's God over the peoples and on behalf of his own people. So as they're getting ready to go into Canaan, it's no coincidence here that they're going to witness God perform wonders as they're getting ready to go into the land that he's promised them, as they're getting ready to enter into a foreign land with pagan deities and all these different systems of trusting in something other than Yahweh. This is how his name goes out before himself. And Yahweh not only affirms his promise to be with Joshua, he promises to make Joshua into a great leader. And just like we saw with this focus of the ark that's going before them, God is their leader and he's the one who guides. Like we talked about last week, because this way in which Joshua is telling the people, here's what God is calling us to do. Get ready, get mobilized. Here's where we're going to go into this land that God's leading us to. And as he's been told, be strong and of good courage, the people can look back at him and say, we'll go and we'll do everything that God is commanding you to do because we recognize that he's with you as he was with Moses. And they can turn back to him and say, be strong and of good courage. Because they also recognize that Joshua is not their leader just because he was a strong commander who just rose in the ranks, amassed power and influence, and here he is. God's standards of leadership are not about who rises to the top in a dog-eat-dog world. It's not about the strongest and most powerful, even if Joshua is a strong man and a commander who's seen combat prior to this time. Their leadership is based on Yahweh. He's the one who's leading them. He's the one who's calling Joshua to continue to follow him in obedience and to model that obedience for the rest of his people. And as we got to see in these first few verses, the people are having to trust in where Yahweh is leading them. Clear instructions are given. We see that they're to ritually cleanse themselves. They're to send the priests out with the ark ahead of them. We know how far they're supposed to follow them because that's another way in which we get to learn more about who God is as he reveals himself to his people. This is how holy he is. This is what his presence to be among human beings means. That he is so holy, his holy is dangerous. And we also see that he commands Joshua to select 12 men, one from each tribe. But we don't get to see yet why. And little by little, the way that the narrative is set up, it's written so that we see an unfolding of what God is doing. Nothing's clear from the very beginning. There's not this, right from the beginning, this, here's exactly what I'm going to do, get ready. Here's all the things that I want you to do. They're supposed to get moving. There's very specific things that they're called to do, and God does tell them, here's what you can expect now that we are about to cross over. But this is a big moment. And in all these instructions, even though God is unfolding what he plans to do as they go forward in the promised land, this moment is big because the obstacle before them is very clear. They go right up to the river Jordan, and no one's asking, if not, like, at least not that's written here, like, okay, well, what's God going to do? What they do have is God's promises, his presence, and what he expects of them in the moment. And they trust him. And they obey, and they go forward. Let's pick up in verse 9. So Joshua told the Israelites, come and listen to what Yahweh, your God, says. Today you will know that the living God is among you. He will surely drive out the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites ahead of you. Look, the ark of the covenant, which belongs to the Lord of the whole earth, will lead you across the Jordan River. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. Joshua is now able to tell them exactly what they can expect God to do and why he will do it. Although there's still lack of understanding as to why pick 12 men, why one from each tribe. Because there's this constant unfolding of trust me, follow me. And we see that God's presence directs his people to trust in his unfolding plans. God's presence directs his people to trust in his unfolding plans. As God promised to be with Joshua and to be among his people, he's expecting them to follow where he leads, even if the path isn't clear. They trust in him because of the faith and the confidence that they have that he is among them. That everything that he is reaffirming and promising from the beginning of chapter 1 to now, they're trusting as they walk forward. Let's keep going as we get to watch this happen. So picking up in verse 14, it says, So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited there until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. Just as Joshua had told the people would happen, the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant into the middle of the Jordan River, and as soon as they get to the water's edge, the water begins to part and begins to pile up on the side. And it's very emphatic, and it is in the next chapter, over and over and over, that they got to cross, the entire nation of Israel got to cross over on dry, not soggy ground. And the Ark of the Covenant, carried by the priests, leads the way. This crossing of the ark isn't just symbolic because it's not just some religious relic. It's not just some banner that they fly. This is God's presence going before them and laying the way out for them to cross the threshold into the land that he is delivering over to them. And we see a foreshadow. In verse 16, right at the end, then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. So we've already seen kind of a big foreshadowing in chapter 2 as the spies go into the land, and the very first place that they go to is this massive fortified city called Jericho. And we get to see that they can expect the very first place that they're going to be encountering is this city. And so there's nothing else mentioned here in the rest of these few chapters that we're reading today, but there's this bit of foreshadowing that they are almost face to face with this other big obstacle as they cross the Jordan. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of just where it is, this is Jericho represented both in the Old Testament and the New Testament that we get to see. It's a little bit hard to see on these TVs, but you'll see two little green dots there. It might be harder to see on this one. It's a little hard to tell from here. But you see two green dots, and the one right above the other is about where Jericho in the Old Testament right here would have been. And you can see the Jordan River kind of right in the middle of this valley here. So as they would have crossed, they would have been almost right there, getting to see exactly where God is leading them to next. And just a little bit of a picture of kind of people imagining what it would have looked like to have this massive number of people crossing over the Jordan River. And I was actually kind of disappointed because I tried to see if I could find the Ark of the Covenant here, and it's either intentionally really buried in the mass of the people there in the middle of the Jordan River, just to kind of show that it's there, but the sense of how many people were crossing at a time, just going around as they're getting to follow God's presence as he's leading them forward. But just a little bit of a fun illustration there. Now, interestingly, just a little bit of a history nerd moment. So, a lot of you may be aware of the kind of, maybe not. If you're not, that's fine. But this kind of meme that was going around a couple of years ago where wives or girlfriends, anyone would ask their significant other, their husband or boyfriend, like, hey, do you ever think about the Roman Empire? And oftentimes they would say, yeah, I do actually. And they'd be like, wait, what, really? Because they were thinking like, yeah, that's not something that he would ever think about. Like, he's not like a history nerd. And he's like, yeah, actually I do. It's like, wait, what? And it blew up and it became this big viral thing for a little while because there were a lot of these guys that was like, yeah, once in a while, I guess I do think about the Roman Empire. It's like, well, what is it that you think about it? And it was just this really interesting social moment where we got to see how this very interesting, very now distant, 2,000 years distant, historical kind of parenthesis in the whole history of the world is still kind of embedded in our modern Western imaginations in some really interesting ways. Now, I bring this up just to kind of point out that there's an interesting parallel to kind of point out a little bit of the history of the Roman Empire as it became the Roman Empire. And I unfortunately don't have a picture of this, but you may have either in high school history, college history, heard of Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River. And it's this really interesting historical moment because around 50 BC, during the existence of the Roman Republic, not yet an empire, there's this guy, Julius Caesar. He's a Roman commander. He's a military commander who's amassing great power. He has a lot of influence. He has a really strong military force. He's overseeing this particular Roman province that he's in charge of. He has political rivals over in the Senate in Rome itself. And as he's garnering power and he's building and he has these political aspirations, a lot of the Roman Senate and a lot of his rivals became concerned and fearful of this influence that he was building over time. And so they ordered him to disband his military force and to return to Rome as a private citizen. Now, for Julius Caesar, he knew that this would put him at risk, that he was going to be vulnerable to arrest. He was not going into an environment that was going to be particularly sympathetic to him. Because like I said, he's building his own little power over here as he's conquering little areas over on the edges of what was like the Roman Republic at this time. And as he's amassing power, he doesn't have a whole lot of friends that he's getting called to come and surrender himself to. So he knows that he's vulnerable to prosecution, to arrest, and just a dashing of any of his political aspirations at this time. And so he feels that he has a choice. That with this power that he's built up and with this influence and with this actual military power, because he was a brilliant military genius, that he had a choice. That either I can go and I can give myself up and that's the end. Everything that I've worked towards my whole career, my whole life, everything that my aspirations, everything that I want to continue to do, it just ends right there. And so he decides to bring his troops to the edge of the Italian border. And this particular border of his province and Italy proper was the Rubicon River. And it was illegal in Roman law at the time for a Roman provincial governor to march his troops into Italy proper. And so there he is standing on the edge of the Rubicon River, and he's looking across, and he has this moment of hesitation as he realizes just the bigness of the moment. do I do this? Because once I take my troops forward and I cross into Italy proper, as I cross this river, there's no going back. It's a zero-sum game. Either I lose everything and surrender myself and that's it, or I go and I try to take it all and I see where this path leads. And as history would have it, as I'm sure you can probably guess, he crossed the river, opened up Roman civil war for the next several years. Ultimately, he achieved victory and he was able to get control of the Roman government. He turned the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, which, as you know, is the massive geopolitical force that existed at the time that Jesus was born into the world. And that's where it all started, was this moment of decision for a man who was deciding, do I go and I take everything for myself, or do I give it all up? The decision to cross was so significant and consequential in history that the phrase crossing the Rubicon has come to refer to consequential and irreversible decisions. But before the Rubicon, there was the Jordan. And I would argue that the crossing of the Jordan River is far more consequential in history, as we get to see God's people go into a land that he had promised them, as he's bringing to fulfillment everything that he's been calling them to. This is where it starts for God's people going into the land that they are to go and take possession of and impact the rest of the nations. But to contrast, rather than pursuing political ambitions and the choice of power or ruin, Joshua and the people of Israel are exercising faith in Yahweh. This is not about a self-motivated, power-hungry military leader, because Yahweh himself miraculously led the crossing for his people through the river. For Israel, the crossing of the Jordan meant committing to Yahweh's plan and provision. This was an act of faith because they trusted in God's promise, and they followed his presence to lead them miraculously across the river. And isn't it so interesting how we see this dynamic in the world constantly, where it's you have to struggle and you have to fight to survive? It's a dog-eat-dog world. If you want power, this is what you need to do to get it. But God is teaching the people of Israel, if you're to be my people, and if you're to be a blessing to the rest of the nations, you're to rely on me. That means that power is not something that's just for you to just take. I'm the one that you trust. I'm the one that you trust in. I'm your source of identity. I'm your source of calling. I'm your source of provision. So as this miracle is performed, and they follow Yahweh's presence across the Jordan River, we see, predating hundreds of years before this other historical event that still kind of lingers in the imaginations of people here today, that rather than this being a moment of, let's go get land, let's go take what's ours, this is God leading his people and stepping forward in relationship with them. That's the significance of the tablets of the law being there in the Ark of the Covenant as God's leading them forward. We see that God demonstrates his power to his people so that they would know him and trust his faithfulness. He demonstrates his power to his people so they would know him and trust in his faithfulness. He's showing himself to this new generation to be Lord of all creation. He knows no boundaries or barriers. He's able to carry out his plan and lead his people where he is calling them to go. He's more powerful than anything they will encounter. I love the song that we sang today. The song Tremble, where we got to sing over and over, Jesus, You make the darkness tremble, where we just get to sing and acknowledge together just how powerful the name of Jesus is. That we recognize that what we live according to is utter foolishness to the rest of the world's system. That what to the rest of the world looks like giving up, surrendering influence and power and wealth, in our context, comfort, maybe assurance in this is the plan that I've laid out for my life and this is exactly how I want it to play out and how it's going to play out. We don't always get that luxury when we're following where God's calling us to. But we do get to experience his presence, and we get to experience his power in real ways. And we get to know him better. And we get to see how he's faithful. I'm going to lead us to this kind of third big stop through. We're going to kind of skim through chapter 4, kind of like what we did with chapter 2 last week, where we only kind of focused on a couple highlights. And I will start off the beginning of chapter 4 by reading these first few verses as well. So going to Joshua chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, it reads, "When all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight.' So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. He told them, 'Go into the middle of the Jordan, in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder. 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever.'" I want to pick up with a story that I began with at the kind of the beginning of our message for today, where I gave this preview of this hike that I went on and this intense exhaustion that I got to experience as I was going on this trail in Colorado. And this wasn't just any trail. This was actually the trail leading to the top of Pikes Peak. So 12 years ago, I feel like I may have even used this in another sermon illustration. This was such kind of a big thing. Oh my gosh, what a cool, crazy thing that just happened. And so it's this neat moment where I got to, 12 years ago, 2013, I was going on a sort of a 2-week conference, Christian college camp, you could say, on engaging with apologetics, belief, and how it is that, we kind of engage with faith in the college and the university setting. So you're there for 2 weeks, and about halfway through those 2 weeks, there's kind of a big activity that you can choose to do with other people, where you can go either whitewater rafting, you can go rappelling, or you can go on a hike to the top of Pikes Peak. So being the Boy Scout that I had been and Eagle Scout that I am, we kind of like to joke about it. I decided to go, let's go on a hike. That sounds fun. And they told us before going on this hike that there was a hill, they called it a hill, didn't feel like a hill to me, near where we were staying. I think they called it Red Mountain, Red Hill, something. They were like, okay, in order to kind of prime yourself and get ready, you need to hike up that hill 3 times before this weekend when you go to Pikes Peak, because you need to condition yourself, because most of us were not from Colorado, and I for sure, coming from Mississippi, was pretty used to being near sea level, and I was very much not near sea level where I was. So I had to condition myself to getting used to the lack of oxygen and the way that the conditions were, had to stay hydrated. They told us from the beginning, make sure that you're drinking water over and over and over. And the hike lasted about 4 to 5 hours. And most of the beginning of the hike looked a lot like this, like you're hiking through thick, lush forests. It was beautiful. It was green. It was a little chilly, but not too bad. And as we got started, we were all kind of together as a group. And as you're going on these switchback trails, the group everyone's going at a different pace. And so the line kind of gets thinner and thinner as some people go faster and some people linger a little bit more. And so it just kind of slinkies like this as this whole group. And some of us waited a long time at the very end for some of the rest too. But you're going through this trail, and then it begins to start looking like this, because you're reaching the end of the tree line where the trees are no longer growing. We're following this trail together, and it's easy to kind of figure out where we need to go because it's Pikes Peak. There's a lot of people hiking on this trail. And as we're going up, and as we're getting more and more spread out, so do the trees. And the terrain begins to look a lot more like this. And what had been a fun forest hike turned into a very rocky, rough trek. And I'll tell you, trying to figure out where the path wasn't always easy. And Pikes Peak wasn't always visible to us except for maybe the second half, and that's where it got harder to actually see where the trail was that we were supposed to be going. So I took this picture from the trail where it was a lot more obvious, but there were parts where the terrain got so bumpy and rough and just rocks everywhere that you couldn't always make out where you were going. And getting spread out, there's moments in which you're kind of like, okay, where am I? And it's just open. And because the air is so thin up there, you almost can't hear anybody nearby either. It's a very eerie feeling. And so as I was going along this trail and as I was getting exhausted, this poor Mississippi kid trying to figure out how he's going to get to that's Pikes Peak right there. That's the finish line. This is by the time we got a lot closer, and even then it took about another hour to get from here to the top there. I'm wondering, okay, how do I know where to go? And I had little moments of panic where I'm like, I think I'm getting lost, which is weird because that's it right there, and I have no idea exactly how to get from here to across this terrain to there. Because there were dips, there were ledges, there were massive boulders, all kinds of things that obscured the path. But the thing that helped me were these things right here. And I looked through my pictures, and unfortunately, I didn't get any pictures of them, but I saw a lot of objects that looked like this. These are called cairns, and they do exactly what they helped me with that day. They're trail markers. So periodically, as I'm going through and trying to figure out where it is that I need to go, I can see the destination, but all I see right in front of me is a really, really rough terrain that I'm not sure how to navigate, particularly on my own. I was there with a friend that I'd made that week who was from Colorado, who had done this trail many times, but he was like a mountain goat. And periodically, I just get left behind, and so I'm having to figure this out by myself. And I can't tell you the sense of relief that I would feel when I would see one of these from a distance and be like, okay, good, that's the way to go. And you would think that you saw what the terrain looked like. It's just a bunch of rocks everywhere. You would think that you wouldn't be able to see something like this. But the truth is, this really stands out. And the reason is because as you're going along the trail, you're seeing the way that nature has just kind of left the terrain the way it is. But this is a very unnatural way of seeing the terrain kind of stacked in front of you. And there's this it's hard to put words to it, this almost liminal sense as you're walking by these, because you've seen how other human beings have been here. Something else has happened here before you've set foot in this particular path. You may be trying to figure out, okay, me and my little world trying to get from here to there, that other people have gone this way before and have left these piles of rocks in a very unnatural way that stands out from the rest of the terrain around you. And it catches your attention because it tells you that something happened here. Now, modern day cairns, different from what we see here, because cairns aren't necessarily marking something, here's an important thing that happened right here, so much as it is, hey, a person was here. This is the way you need to go. But these stones that Joshua is instructing them to pick up and to build a memorial with are to be just as effective at catching attention as this. These were called standing stones, or stones of witness. They later became known as Ebenezer stones, that you might have heard of. I could make a bunch of Ebenezer Scrooge jokes, but for the sake of time, I won't. This name kind of was introduced when Samuel set up a stone to memorialize Yahweh's help against the Philistines in 1 Samuel chapter 7. What's interesting to point out is, just like these don't have an inscription on them. They don't have arrows. They don't say, this is what you need to do, this is where you need to go. There's not an inscription on these stones of witness. But I like how this one commentator, kind of in a podcast, as he was talking about what the significance is of this, he explains it this way. He says it's supposed to stand out and look totally awkward and demand that whoever sees it ask the question, what happened here? They're called stones of witness because at some point you have to tell the story. Somebody has to be there to say, let me tell you the story of what happened here in this spot. Jacob did this too back in Genesis. There's multiple points throughout the Old Testament when God's people see God himself show up in a real powerful way, and they set up something that even with no words on it, they can point to and say, here's where God showed up here, and I experienced who he is right here. I'll skip ahead a little bit to where this is retold, because we saw how right here we see the emphasis on this is what you're to tell your children, that the Ark of the Covenant crossed over as God's Ark of the Covenant crossed over and the water was parted. And this particular instruction that Joshua gives is so significant. We see it brought up in a very, very similar way, but slightly different at the same time. Skipping ahead to verse 21, Joshua said to the Israelites, in the future your children will ask, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever. This is meant to be remembered not just by this generation's children, but by their children's children and their children's children. Because remember that this is a new generation. This is not the generation of Israelites that came out of slavery in Egypt and saw the parting of the Red Sea. God is showing up here to remind them, this is who I am. This is who I've been. This is to be a direct reminder of how God delivers his people. Over and over, you see the terms dry land. He kept it dry until you were across. When he dried it up, over and over and over. This is God showing up in a powerful way for his people that they remember. And Joshua is telling them, this is something that we need to remember, not just for your children, but for generation after generation, because this is where God showed up, and this is why he did what he did. And towards the end of this passage, there's previews of what we're going to see in chapter 5, where they're following God's commands. This generation has not celebrated Passover, and they're about to in the next chapter. All these things that they're about to go and do. But Joshua tells them to stop and to build a memorial so that they can remember how God showed up for his people. So that when they can expect God to take them into the promised land, when they can expect the fulfillment of his promise, that it's going to happen, they can look back and say, here's where it started right here. This is how God showed up for us. God's people remember his faithfulness when they remember how he showed up for them. They remember his faithfulness when they remember how he showed up for them. I think about a lot of times in my life where I can look back and I can see very tangible ways where God showed up in a way that I was not expecting. I have a lot of financial provision stories that I could give you where, even since y'all have known me here at Ethnos, where just even like a random IRS check coming out of nowhere from a tax return I'd filed years before that just got lost, and then the day that we needed it just showed up. And that's just one example. But one of the things that Christine and I have wanted to learn how to do is, how do we look back and see where God showed up and showed us something, reminded us of his faithfulness? Times where we didn't know how we were going to get from here to here. We didn't know how we were going to make it through a certain circumstance. A lot of times it was financial, coming out of seminary, going into ministry, and going into counseling. That's a very real thing that we've experienced, but a lot of ways in which we didn't have clarity on what the next step for us was. And at the 11th hour, God shows up. I have stories that I've shared with a lot of you of how even during prayer time, I've been able to experience something just in the last few months of how God's reminded me of something in a time where I was like, I don't know what that is or what that means for me right now, but I trust you, and that means something to me right now, and that gives me peace. Only months later to see oh, I'm getting some clarity onto what I was being reminded of in that moment. And so I want to do something as we close today. Before we dismiss to coffee break, I've put some note cards at each table. If you don't see a little white note card, there should be some cards in a little middle basket there you can take too. And I want to do something together. I want to spend some time praying over you and asking you, what does it look like in your life to see where God has shown up in ways that you didn't expect, that you can look back on and say, God showed up for me here. I remember this. I have a whole bunch of fun little trinket things in my office that if anyone walked in, they're like, this is all useless junk. But I can point to things and tell you the stories behind each of those items and tell you what that means to me. I had a friend who gave me this thing, and this is what that relationship meant. I have, my brother gave me this. And it was a really cool moment where we got to celebrate our friendship and our growth together. So what does it look like for you? I just want to give us a moment and give you some time to pray first, and to just write down ways in which you've seen God show up in a real powerful way. A way that you can look back, regardless of the circumstances that come up over the next several years in your life, you can look back and see, God showed up for me here. I know he's faithful because he showed me this. And then two, after doing that, and I'll walk us through this, I want to ask you, if you were to leave something behind here, just hypothetically, I'm not trying to put ideas in anybody's head, but if you were to leave something behind here at Ethnos to say, God showed up here, what are some times that you can remember in your time at Ethnos that God showed up in a really neat and powerful way? Because as we as a community are transitioning to a new location, transitioning in leadership, I want us to hang on to ways in which we've been able to experience God showing up for us as a community, which he showed us. He gave us a glimpse of something. He showed us who he is. So I'm going to ask Cesar to come up, and we'll just have not too long, about 5-10 minutes, where we're just going to, I want to ask you just to pray with me. Just as the story and the passage we got to engage with today is still stirring and still fresh, as we got to see how God showed up for his people, the people of Israel, as he called them forward, and what it meant for them to trust him in a way that even though things weren't certain and the terrain had a lot of massive obstacles in front of them, that they listened and they followed him. They listened to Joshua not because of who Joshua was, that he was this Julius Caesar type, but that he was an agent of Yahweh. God, as we come before you today, I just want to ask that you quiet our hearts, quiet our minds, as we bring ourselves before you this morning. And just ask that you'd reveal to each and every one of us moments where you've shown up in a real and obvious way. God, each of us having a story and relationship with you in this room. I thank you and I praise you for that. Just go ahead and just ask God, if you haven't written something down already, just take a moment, just as you're sitting in silence. Just ask him to reveal a time in your life where he's shown up and showed you something in a real, obvious way that you can take with you and you can remember. As we just come together as a church family this morning, thank you so much that even as we're coming out of a holiday remembrance of the birth of this particular nation that we physically live in today, we recognize ways in which we get to remember how you've showed up for your people. That is, you've brought to fulfillment what you promised through your people. That even though we know that ultimately the people of Israel throughout the Old Testament struggled to live according to your covenant that you made with them. Just as we recognize that we're sinful human beings. Even though your law is good, it's not enough to make us righteous. And we get to see through the story of Rahab just this moment where, as the New Testament looks back and sees that she's part of the lineage of one that you would send to save us from our sins. The whole reason that we get to be here today, that we get to be grafted in, those of us who were not historically part of this group that you called out to be a light and a blessing to the world, God, you still brought to fulfillment through your Son, Jesus. And as we're here today, just as a local church, as a church family, would you show us this morning and remind us ways in which you've got to step in and show us who you are in powerful ways, obvious ways where we got to look and say, that was God. That wasn't us. That as we look back over generations and as we tell our kids, this is how God showed up for this church family. This is what his church means to him. Speak to us now, God. I just ask that you would just remind us of ways that you've stepped in and shown up. Just want to give you another moment to writing and remembering, sitting in silence with God. God, for us in life, the way forward isn't always crystal clear. That even when we have an idea of the destination and where you're leading us, and we're trusting you to lead us there, whatever circumstance it is, momentary as it is, it can feel really big and it can feel really difficult to know where you are and to trust that you have a plan that's unfolding. But God, as we've been writing this morning, we get to see how you've already showed up. We've gotten to see who it is that you are. As we go forward, we just get to have an expectation that you'll continue to do that. That you'll continue to show up because, God, you're already active in the community where we're going. You've been there. That you've known all along where we're going, even when we haven't. You know all along just what the leadership transition looks like as we're trusting you and we're going forward, and we have this transition plan and checkpoints that we're going to have where we're going to be navigating these next few months. And ultimately, God, we're following your plan for us. We recognize that and we praise your great name, Jesus, and how awesome you are. As we took communion together this morning, as we got to just do something tangible today as a sign of a remembrance of what it is that you've done for us, that right there is a way that we collectively as a church family get to remember. Not because of anything that we did, anything that we are. It's about who you are. And we thank you for that. God, be with us as we go forward, as we go into this week, as each of us goes out into where we live, where we work, where we play. Ask that you would just continue to bind us together as a church family, as we trust in you for rest, for courage, and for guidance. We thank you for all that you are and all that you do. We pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus, by the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, thank you. We're going to dismiss to coffee break. Thank y'all for being here and engaging together. We'll continue on in week 3 next Sunday.